Hey, this is Dan. I'm just finishing out 2023 with a little bit of birding in Florida, having a very nice time. But before the year ends, I thought it would be nice to recap my favorite 5 biology science stories of 2023. Because it was a great year, we had a lot of good stuff, but I thought it'd be good to revisit the highlights. Number 5 for me is the male wasp that stings with its penis. It isn't unusual for a wasp to sting, but it's always the females that sting because a stinger on a wasp is a modified ovipositor, which is a piece of female anatomy normally used to lay eggs that's modified to be a stinger. Males don't have an ovipositor, so normally males can't sting, but researchers in Japan were feeding some male wasps to their frogs, as one does, and they realized that the frogs were spitting them out, and when they looked closely, they saw that this male wasp does have a stinger, and in fact, it's a pair of stingers on the sides of the penis. I always love a penis story. I always find them entertaining. This was a perfect one. So that's number 5. Number 4 is a cool one because it links solar wind and space weather with bird behavior, which you would think would be totally distinct. But there's this phenomenon for birds where sometimes a bird will end up in a place it's really not supposed to be. Like there was this stellar sea eagle that turned up in Massachusetts once. Those things are supposed to live in Russia. They're these giant birds, bigger than a bald eagle. Birders lost their minds. And so people want to know why birds would end up in the wrong place like that. Turns out, if you look at patterns of space weather, birds are more likely to show up in places where the magnetic field is messed up because of big space weather. And so this link between what's going on with the sun and what's going on in birds' heads has never been made before. That was my number 4 story for the year. Number 3 might be my favorite, but I can't put it at number 1 because I'm one of the co-authors. I did this paper with Jerry Carter. We were trying to figure out for vampire bats, which feed on blood, how they evolved that ability. So to do that, we came at it from 2 different directions. One, we tried to figure out what the ancestors of vampire bats were feeding on when they evolved to become blood feeders. We figured out they were probably insect eaters. And we also looked at all the different blood feeders we could find in the whole animal kingdom to look at the transitions that they made towards blood feeding to see if there were any clues there. And one of my favorite sort of stones that we turned over in that was a paper showing this midge that feeds on mosquitoes to drink blood out of them. So this mosquito will go and drink the blood of some animal, and then this midge lands on the mosquito like it's a mini mosquito and drinks the blood out of the mosquito. I just think that's awesome. I love that there's a video of this. And it just sort of painted the picture of blood feeding as, yes, it's unusual for mammals, but if you look across the animal kingdom, from lampreys to leeches to ticks to mosquitoes to the whole shebang, it's not unusual at all. We found more than 25 different instances where blood feeding evolved independently. And those vampire bats, by the way, they probably evolved that ability when they were feeding on wounds of big animals, or they were feeding on the insects that accumulate at the wounds of big animals. So anyway, that was number 3. I like that paper a lot. Number 2 is a cool one because it's about biotechnology. It's a paper about genetically modified silkworms that have been modified so that instead of making silk, which is what you would expect them to make, they now make spider silk. So this is using CRISPR to take the DNA of spiders and put it into caterpillars. It's very Spider-Man, genetically modified, taking spider DNA, putting it in someone else, but instead of getting spider senses, these silkworms spin webs of spider web. And that's really cool because spider web is a great material. It's stronger than Kevlar, it's extremely flexible, it's biodegradable, it's got all these properties that make it like the perfect textile, but it's really hard to get out of spiders because if you put a bunch of spiders in a glass jar so you can get spider web from them, they don't spin all that many webs and they just eat each other. Silkworms don't do that. They've been bred for 4,000 years at least to make silk reliably, and so by putting the DNA from spiders into silkworms, we've got ourselves a new technology that I think is going to have some really cool applications in the years to come. And finally, my number 1 story, my favorite story for the whole year, shows the resilience of nature over humans because it is birds making nests out of the spikes that are supposed to stop birds from making nests. So people put up these anti-bird spikes on window ledges, even on trees sometimes, to try to repel birds, make sure they don't nest there. Some crows and some magpies in Europe have been pulling those anti-bird spikes off the buildings, carrying them back to a nest, and then using them to build their nest. And so the fact that a bird can make a nest out of something that's designed to prevent birds from making nests to me is a great way to finish out 2023, just to think about the resilience of nature and the ingenuity of nature, the intelligence of birds. It's a reminder of how cool nature is if you stop to look at it. And that was just this year. I can't wait to see what 2024 brings, and I hope you have a great new year as well. Thanks.